Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Corrupt Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2004 comedy drama titled The Terminal. Now, The Terminal runs for 2 hours and 8 minutes long. It is directed by Steven Spielberg and is produced by Steven Spielberg, Walter Parkes, and Laurie MacDonald. The script was done by Sasha Gervasi and Jeff Nathanson. The score was done by John Williams. The cinematography by Janis Kaminski. And the editing was done by Michael Kahn. And the stars of the movie are Tom Hanks, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Stanley Tucci, Chai McBride, Diego Luna, Zoe Saldana, and Kumar Pallana. Now, unlike his good friend George Lucas, who spent a grand portion of the last 2 decades fixated on creating more interpretations for pointless Star Wars incarnates, like as if there were no tomorrow, his cohort, Steven Spielberg, has arbitrarily took different avenues in the film industry to exhibit his versatility as a director, and in The Terminal, he shows just how dynamic he is as a director, and after almost 45 years in the film industry, he still manages to come up with a wide range of topics that enlightens us that there is a world out there besides Star Wars. Just like the previous outing before The Terminal, Catch Me If You Can, the subject matter has a humble idea brewing along, but the subtlety by Spielberg along with the likable characters make this one, like Catch Me If You Can, an enlightening character study that will leave you glued to your seat. The Terminal could very much be a comeback to Spielberg's early roots when he used to direct more artsy-like films. Or he may be doing light, stylish pictures so that he can prepare himself for his next big-budgeted film, which eventually became War of the Worlds. But for what this movie stands out, we'll just have to sit back and enjoy the ride. Tom Hanks, who has been a favorite performer of Spielberg, stars as an Eastern European person by the name of Victor Navorsky, who came from the fictitious country of Krakosia and arrives at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City. When he arrives in America, he receives the news that his country is embarked in a bloody war and it's unsafe to return there. With the government there being overthrown, his country is now just as good as being obsolete, which makes Dvorsky's passport practically next to nothing. In others, he can't go home because he has no home. He has no home left. Plus, he's also at a turmoil because he can't really enter America because he has to go through a lot of hurdles to get through. In simpler terms, this man has no place to call home to. He can't go to America because his visa and his passport has been somewhat invalid, I suppose. And he can't go back to his home country of Krakosia because his country is at war. And he practically does not have a home to turn to. It's unsafe. So what does he have to do? He has to end up spending a indefinite amount of time at John F. Kennedy Airport. You know, they give him vouchers, for shopping and stuff like that. He needs to find ways to survive in this rather huge airport. And of course, he has to make the most of his time. I mean, if he wanted to, he could have just walked out and escaped security. But this man is a guy who has a lot of heart. This is a man who is an honest individual. And this is a man who has a substantial amount of patience and is willing to stay at the airport until he could either be able to go into America or he could go back home to Krakoshka. Now, aside from this being a bit of a comedy, there is actually a little bit of a mystery in this story too as well. The big mystery is that comes from the fact that he's always seen sporting a small can of Planters peanuts. And the big mystery in this movie is what's inside that bag? What's inside that container of Planters peanuts? What's inside that can? Could it be just peanuts? Or is there something else that lies in it? Who knows? That is one of the big mysteries that kind of bestows upon this movie, which actually makes it much more interesting to watch. And also, a lot of times we have to wonder, what is his purpose of coming to America? Is he here to stay? Does he have a specific reason? What's the purpose? I mean, it's not like I have any objections towards him coming to America, but why? So that's kind of like what carries the movie along. So Victor's first hurdle is he must conflict towards is the Homeland Security officer who goes by the name of Frank Dixon, played by Stanley Tucci, who tries to simplify things to our unilingual immigrant that in order to enter the country he must have tons of paperwork he must undertake and must be completed. Now, Frank Dixon may come across as the antagonist in the story, but he is an actual fair man. He does give Mr. Navorsky, a chance to stay at the airport until things are cleared. But at the same time, he doesn't want to like make things as simplifying for this guy. And I actually personally think that in a way Stanley Tucci's character Frank Dixon kind of reminds me of like antagonists very similar to characters like Ranger Smith from Yogi Bear, Mr. Peebles from Magilla Gorilla, or Mr. Twiddles from Wally Gator. In a way, he's sort of in that vein. I mean, this is a guy who's just doing his job. He's dedicated to his job. He's been working at Homeland Security for the last 17 years. He's up for a high-ranking promotion. And I guess in some ways he feels that Navorsky is probably just getting in the way from what could be a potential promotion for him. Of course, sometimes he does a little bit of scheming so that, like to try to get Navorsky to, step out so that somebody else could take the burden off his hands. But it seems like Navorsky is a stubborn man. But not stubborn in a bad way, stubborn in an actual very good way, that, he is patient and that he is willing to go through the customs in order to either just enter America or just simply take the next flight back home to Krakoshka. Krakosia. Right. I don't know, it's a fictitious city. Was there any cliches in this movie? There may have been a bit of some cliches in this film, being to the fact that there was the scene where some guy who was fighting with Homeland Security was talking in Russian, and because of the fact that Navorsky, who's Eastern European, Krakosian, so to speak, ends up speaking to this Russian guy, if you really listen in, or if you are of Eastern European extraction, you may notice that Navorsky was actually speaking to him in Bulgarian and not in Russian. And I think that's kind of a little bit of a cliche. Why? Because all languages in Slavic actually mean the same thing. I mean, like if a Slovakian was to speak to a Russian, and they have very um, similar language, similar language, verbal words. You think that they're able to communicate? It's almost not any much different than when an English person speaks to a German. I mean, English is a Germanic language, just like German is. But in the end, we don't actually really fully understand each other. Or like, let's say I went to England and they speak English, but they don't speak our kind of English. So in a way, that is kind of a bit of a cliche. And I think that's the only cliche really that comes in mind. Days have gone by and Krakosia has not let up, and a homeless Victor has now taken residence at Gate 67. Frank now has a dilemma right under his nose. Frank feels the only solution would be is to get himself off the hook and let someone else take the Victor situation off his hands. He gives Victor approval to leave the area and praying that he'll be incarcerated by the immigration officials. Being raised in a communist-born country, Victor is oblivious to the government policies, and he just decides to just patiently remain at JFK Airport, much to the chagrin of Mr. Dixon. And this leads to the expected friction between the uptight Frank and the wedge that Victor has made himself to be towards Frank. So with Frank determined to make Victor's stay more laborious than one deserves, Victor progressively, befriends several employees at the airport, which includes the introverted food service worker named Enrique, played by Diego Luna, who will offer Victor food if he can get more info on a fellow employee he's secretly smitten with by the name of Dolores, played by Zoe Saldana, or Officer Torres. His other friends include a cargo handler named Joe, played by Shy McBride, and a custodial worker by the name of Gupta. Kumar, no, I think his name was Gupta. I don't know his first name or last name. I think he just goes by the name of Gupta, played by Kumar Pallana. Victor eventually gets a job in some kind of construction job or some kind of landscaping. And he also gets romantically linked to a flight attendant named Amelia Warren, played by Catherine Zeta-Jones. Now, this is kind of something I didn't really like in this subplot. I was hoping first at the end of the movie that Victor and Amelia would end up becoming, boyfriend and girlfriend. But in the end, it turns out, because throughout most of the movie, Amelia has been lamenting that her boyfriend has not been too honest with her. And it looked as though as if they were getting one step closer to, getting romantically linked. But then in the end, they cheated out on the script and eventually Amelia goes back to him. Which goes, I'm glad that it wasn't too overdone with the romantic links, but I would have liked to have seen Victor and Amelia become a happy couple in the end. But I guess because that was kind of a bit of a distraction, but I don't think it really hindered the movie quite ostensibly. So I guess that's kind of a good thing, eh, eh, so to speak. The characters depicted here is where the comedy factor is featured, and at times it feels at most improvised by the cast, which speaks volume, knowing that Spielberg is behind the camera. And I've always known from history that Spielberg is quite the perfectionist, but he's letting his cast practically improvise, which is actually quite effective. It makes it more realistic. Since this is a character driven film, why not? Hanks does a wonderful job here and captures a sense of likability, like one of the most endearing characters in the 1990s, mainly Forrest Gump. In many ways, he's almost like reliving Forrest Gump with an Eastern European accent. Catherine Zeta-Jones has a very limited role here, but she excels well here as a love-confused character stuck in a vulnerable position. Normally, I cringe whenever Stanley Tucci ends up playing hateful characters because of his reputation of overacting them. Sure, his villainy here is portrayed as kind of cliche, but here he's playing it more subtle, and that's refreshing coming from Tucci. Okay, maybe he's not wearing the metaphoric black hat and twirling his mustache, but still, hey, at least, as an antagonist in this story, he actually is more refreshing, playing it more low key than than in his normal films. Granted, Spielberg can overthrow us with overly done schmaltz, but here the schmaltz was limited, and that makes the film all the more enthralling. The characters are overall low key, but developed enough to get to know them, and his light direction doesn't give us any indication that this movie is directed by a legend in his craft. The script was written by Andrew Niccol, who gave us the great classic movie The Truman Show, as he succeeds in keeping the script light with no heavy-handed stuff to catch you off guard, while he succeeds in keeping it unconventional. The final scenes feature little surprises that will shock you in some way to the point of refraining from any kind of contrived Hollywood formula. Overall, the terminal succeeds in being more truthful in showing how developed countries like the United States reacts towards foreigners who want to start a life in this country. But if Navarsky wants to start a new life in this country, or does he have any other logical explanations why he came to New York? The film fends itself nice through the characters and the interactions between them. It's a film that charmingly demonstrates paranoia, insecurity, xenophobia that manifests within the diversity of American people, and this movie could show a sweet side to a rather serious subject without feeling cheated. Now, many people were actually, as a note here, many people were actually appalled by this movie because they were kind of expecting a movie to be based on a actual real life situation involving an Iranian individual who went by the name of Nasiri. I forget his name. Anyways, between 1988 to 2006, he has been living at the Charles de Gaulle airport in Paris, France, and he he was actually offered $250,000 for this movie. Of course, he no longer is at Charles de Gaulle. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the last time I've heard from him, he is actually now been institutionalized with a terminal illness. No pun intended. And many people were actually ticked off. They were expecting a movie like this because this movie is actually supposed to be based loose on this. So people got pissed off because they thought that this movie was more about product placement, more about glorifying Americanism, and had some kind of a Bush administrative agenda hidden in them. But me, I didn't really think that. I thought of it as being an original story. I thought it was refreshing, and I thought that Steven Spielberg did a good job in directing it, and I thought that the cast did an excellent job as well. Whether you're playing a major role like Tom Hanks and Stanley Tucci to the more supporting roles like Catherine Zeta-Jones and Diego Luna and Zoe Saldana, I thought they all did quite well. This was a wonderful movie. It's light, it's fun, and I actually enjoyed this movie by the bunch. So if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give it an 8. So I guess this ends my rider review. I know this was a little bit longer than usual. And I'd like to thank you all for listening in. If you want to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. As always, remember, be kind, be courteous, don't be rude. And I will be back again with another review. So until next time, this is Eric Kurt Ryder saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.